When I found that contract with my signature on it, sitting on the lawyer's desk like a death sentence, I never imagined that in less than 24 hours, I would be standing in an empty house that was no longer mine, holding nothing but the clothes on my back and 43 years of memories that nobody could steal from me. Before I dive into how my own flesh and blood destroyed everything I'd worked for, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about how trust can be both our greatest strength and our most dangerous weakness. Now, let me take you back to when I still believed my grandson was my guardian angel. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 73 years old, and for most of my life, I considered myself one of the lucky ones. I had a beautiful marriage with my late husband Robert for 45 years, raised 2 wonderful children, and was blessed with 4 grandchildren who brought light to my golden years. But among all of them, David stood out like a shining star. David was my eldest daughter Patricia's boy, 28 years old with the kind of smile that could melt your heart from across a room. While his cousins were busy with their own lives, David was the one who called every Sunday, the one who showed up when my sink was leaking, the one who remembered my birthday with flowers and my favorite chocolate cake from Miller's Bakery downtown. After Robert passed 3 years ago, David became my lifeline. When other family members offered condolences and disappeared back into their busy lives, David was there every weekend, fixing whatever needed fixing, grocery shopping with me, and most importantly, just sitting on my front porch talking about everything and nothing. He had this way of making me feel like I wasn't just surviving widowhood. I was living through it. "Grandma Margaret," he'd say, settling into Robert's old rocking chair like he belonged there. "You raised the strongest woman I know. Mom learned everything from you, and she taught me to always take care of family." I believed every word because David had never given me a reason not to. When my arthritis made gardening difficult, he planted my tomatoes. When technology confused me, he set up my smartphone and showed me how to video call my sister in Florida. When I worried about being alone, he'd call just to chat about his job at the insurance company or his girlfriend Jessica's latest cooking experiments. The neighbors on Elm Street knew David almost as well as they knew me. Mrs. Rodriguez next door would wave from her kitchen window whenever she saw his blue Honda pulling into my driveway. "That boy of yours is a treasure, Margaret," she'd tell me over the fence. "Not many young people these days care about their grandparents like he does." I'd beam with pride every time someone complimented David. At church, at the grocery store, at my book club meetings, whenever his name came up, I'd launch into stories about his kindness, his reliability, his genuine love for family. "He's going to make something special of himself," I'd say. "He's got such a good heart." David seemed to share everything with me. He talked about his dreams of buying a house, maybe starting his own insurance agency someday, how much he loved Jessica and thought she might be the one. He showed me pictures of places they'd visited, shared funny stories from work, asked for my advice about everything from career decisions to relationship questions. "Grandma, you've got so much wisdom," he'd say, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I don't know what I'd do without your guidance." Looking back now, I realized those moments were real. The love in his eyes when he looked at me, the genuine laughter we shared, the way he'd hug me just a little tighter when he was leaving. None of that was fake. That's what made everything that happened next so devastating. The David who betrayed me wasn't a stranger wearing my grandson's face. He was my grandson, the same person who'd spent years earning my absolute trust and love. But even the strongest foundations can crack when enough pressure is applied in just the right places. The conversation that changed everything started on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon in early October. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting Elm Street in those golden colors that made me fall in love with autumn every year. David had stopped by after work, still wearing his crisp white shirt and blue tie, looking every inch the successful young professional I was so proud of. We were sitting in my living room, sharing a pot of coffee and some of those butter cookies he loved, when he set down his cup with an unusually serious expression. "Grandma, I've been thinking about something, and I want to run it by you," he said, leaning forward with that earnest look he got when discussing important matters. "You know how much I worry about you managing everything on your own." I felt a familiar warmth spread through my chest. Even at 73, having someone care about my well-being felt like the most precious gift. "David, sweetheart, I'm managing just fine. You don't need to worry about your old grandmother so much. But that's just it, he continued, his voice taking on that gentle, persuasive tone he'd inherited from his mother. You shouldn't have to just manage. You worked 40 years as a school secretary, raised 2 kids, took care of Grandpa Robert through his illness. You deserve to really enjoy your retirement, not spend it worrying about bills and paperwork and all the complicated stuff that comes with getting older. The way he said it made perfect sense. Since Robert's death, I had been struggling with things that used to be his department. Investment statements I didn't understand, insurance paperwork that seemed to multiply every month, property tax documents that made my head spin. David had helped me with some of it, but I could see the concern in his eyes whenever I'd call him confused about yet another official-looking envelope. I've been learning a lot about retirement planning at work, David continued, warming to his subject. Did you know there are ways to restructure your assets that could save you thousands in taxes? Ways to make sure your pension and Social Security go further? There are even programs designed specifically for widows in situations like yours. My heart swelled with pride listening to him. Here was my grandson, barely 30 years old, already thinking like the successful businessman I always knew he'd become. That sounds wonderful, honey, but I wouldn't even know where to start with something like that. That's exactly why I want to help, he said, reaching across to take my hands in his. Grandma, you've given so much to this family. Let me give something back. I've been researching everything, and I even found a lawyer who specializes in retirement restructuring for seniors. Her name is Sarah Mitchell, and she has an amazing track record of helping people in situations exactly like yours. The enthusiasm in his voice was infectious. This was the same excited energy he'd shown me when he got his first promotion, when he'd talked about his plans to propose to Jessica, when he'd described his dreams for the future. Seeing him channel that passion into caring for me felt like watching him become the man I'd always hoped he'd be. I don't know, David. Lawyers are expensive, and I'm not sure I really need— Grandma, please, he interrupted gently. This is my gift to you. I'll cover all the costs. Think of it as my way of saying thank you for everything you've done for me, for our whole family. Besides, the money you'll save in the long run will more than make up for the initial investment. I studied his face, seeing nothing but love and genuine concern. This was David, the boy who'd spent his own allowance to buy me flowers when I was sick, who'd given up weekend plans with friends to help me clean out Robert's belongings, who'd held me while I cried through the first Christmas without my husband. And the best part, he continued, his eyes lighting up, is that once everything is properly structured, you won't have to worry about any of the complicated stuff anymore. All the paperwork, all the decisions, all the stress, it can all be handled for you. You can just focus on enjoying your life, maybe traveling like you and Grandpa always talked about, spending time with friends, pursuing those hobbies you never had time for. The picture he painted was everything I'd secretly dreamed about, but never thought possible. Since Robert's death, I'd felt constantly overwhelmed by responsibilities I didn't understand, always worried I was making the wrong financial decisions, always stressed about whether I'd have enough money to maintain my independence as I got older. Would I still live in my house? I asked, because that was my biggest fear, losing the home Robert and I had shared for so many years. Of course, David said, with a laugh that seemed to wash away my worries. Grandma, this is about making your life easier, not changing it. You'll still be right here on Elm Street, still have your garden, still host Sunday dinners. The only difference is you won't have to lose sleep over financial paperwork anymore. That night, after David left, I sat in Robert's chair and thought about our conversation. My husband had always handled our finances, and since his passing, that burden had felt impossibly heavy. The idea of having someone knowledgeable take care of all the complicated aspects while I focused on living sounded like the answer to prayers I hadn't even known I was praying. I called my sister Helen in Florida to tell her about David's offer. That boy is an angel, Margaret, she said. You're so lucky to have a grandson who cares enough to handle all that complicated stuff for you. Most kids his age can barely manage their own finances, let alone help their grandparents. Her words confirmed what my heart already knew. David wasn't just offering to help, he was offering to free me from the anxiety that had been shadowing my retirement for 3 years. How could I not be grateful for such a blessing? The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 2 p.m. at Sarah Mitchell's law office on the north side of town. David picked me up at 1:30, looking particularly sharp in his navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase that made him look every inch the successful professional. "You look nervous, Grandma," he said as we drove through downtown, his hand reaching over to pat mine reassuringly. "There's nothing to worry about. This is going to be the best thing you've ever done for yourself." Sarah Mitchell's office was impressive, all polished wood and leather-bound books, with diplomas and certificates covering one entire wall. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe in her early 40s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a handshake that was firm but warm. "Mrs. Thompson, it's such a pleasure to meet you," she said, guiding me to a comfortable chair across from her massive desk. "David has told me so much about you. What a lucky woman you are to have such a caring grandson." I beamed at the compliment, watching David settle into the chair beside me with that confident smile I'd grown to love. "He's been such a blessing, especially since my husband passed." "I understand completely," Sarah said, her voice taking on a sympathetic tone. "Losing a spouse is one of life's greatest challenges, and the financial complications that follow can feel overwhelming. That's exactly why we're here today, to simplify everything and give you the peace of mind you deserve." She opened a thick folder and began spreading documents across her desk. "Now, what we're doing today is essentially creating a comprehensive retirement management system. Think of it as putting all your financial affairs into a beautiful, organized package that will work for you instead of against you." The papers looked official and important, with lots of legal language that seemed to swim before my eyes. I'd brought my reading glasses, but the small print and complex terminology made my head spin. "Don't worry about trying to read every word," Sarah said, noticing my confusion. "That's what I'm here for. Let me walk you through the key points." She began explaining various aspects of the arrangement, something about asset restructuring, tax optimization, and streamlined management. Her voice was smooth and professional, and she had a way of making the complex sound simple and beneficial. "The beauty of this system," she continued, "is that all your assets, your house, your savings, your pension, will be managed as a unified portfolio. No more separate statements, no more complicated paperwork, no more wondering if you're making the right decisions." "That sounds wonderful," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I understood all the implications. "And I'll still receive my income every month?" "Absolutely," David interjected, leaning forward eagerly. "That's the whole point, Grandma. You'll get your monthly payments just like always, but without any of the hassle." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Think of this as hiring a full-service financial management team. Except instead of paying fees, you'll actually save money through various tax advantages and optimized investment strategies." She handed me a pen, pointing to several signature lines throughout the documents. "These are just the standard authorization forms, giving us permission to implement the management system we've discussed." I stared at the pen in my hand, feeling a momentary hesitation. "This is a lot to take in," I said. "Maybe I should have my other daughter look at these, or show them to my pastor." "Grandma," David said gently, his voice carrying just a hint of disappointment. "We talked about this. The whole point is to stop burdening other people with your financial worries. Aunt Patricia has her own family to take care of, and Pastor Williams, bless his heart, isn't exactly a financial expert." Sarah nodded understandingly. "Mrs. Thompson, I completely understand your caution. It shows wisdom. But I want you to know that David has already had these documents reviewed by experts at his insurance company. This is a standard arrangement that we've successfully implemented for dozens of clients in situations very similar to yours." "Really?" I asked, feeling somewhat reassured. "Absolutely," she confirmed. "And David insisted on covering all the legal fees himself because he wants to make sure you get the very best care. Not many grandchildren would make that kind of investment in their grandmother's well-being." I looked at David, seeing the love and concern in his eyes, the same expression he'd worn when he'd helped me through Robert's funeral arrangements, when he'd spent hours helping me organize the insurance paperwork after the funeral, when he'd held my hand during those first terrible months of loneliness. "You've always taken such good care of me," I said softly. "And I always will," he replied, squeezing my hand. "This is just the next step in making sure you're protected and comfortable for the rest of your life." I signed the first document, then the second, then the third. Sarah would explain each one briefly. "This one establishes the management structure. This one authorizes the consolidation. This one ensures your monthly income continuity. and I would nod and sign, trusting in the love I saw in my grandson's eyes and the professional competence I heard in the lawyer's voice. The whole process took about an hour. When it was finished, Sarah gathered all the papers into a neat stack and shook my hand warmly. "Congratulations, Mrs. Thompson. You've just taken a huge step towards securing your financial future. You should feel very proud of this decision." As we drove home, David was more animated than I'd seen him in months. "Grandma, you're going to love how much easier your life is about to become. No more worrying about bills, no more confusing statements, no more sleepless nights wondering if you're handling everything correctly." "When will I see the first changes?" I asked. Sarah said it might take a few weeks for everything to be fully processed and implemented. "But once it is, you'll wonder why you waited so long to do this." That evening, I called Helen again to tell her about the meeting. "It sounds like David has thought of everything," she said. "You're so blessed to have someone who cares enough to handle all those complicated details for you." I went to bed that night, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt like I could truly relax and enjoy my retirement without constantly worrying about financial matters I didn't understand. I had no idea that I had just signed away everything I owned. 3 weeks passed in blissful ignorance. I received my usual pension check, my Social Security deposit appeared on schedule, and life continued exactly as David had promised it would. The only difference was the absence of those confusing financial statements that used to clutter my mailbox, and I was grateful for that peaceful simplicity. Then came the phone call that shattered everything. It was a Tuesday morning in early November. I was enjoying my second cup of coffee and watching the morning news when the phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, so I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick it up. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Janet from First National Bank. I'm calling about your mortgage account." My heart skipped a beat. "My mortgage? But I paid that off 15 years ago." There was a pause. "Ma'am, I'm showing here that you have a new mortgage on the property at 847 Elm Street. The first payment was due yesterday, and we haven't received it yet." The coffee cup slipped from my hand, crashing to the floor and splattering hot liquid across my kitchen tiles. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake. I own my house free and clear." "Let me double-check the account." "No, ma'am. I'm looking at a mortgage originated 3 weeks ago for $180,000. The borrower is listed as Margaret Thompson. That's you, correct?" My legs felt weak. I groped for a chair and sank into it, my mind reeling. I didn't sign anything for a mortgage. There has to be an error." "Ma'am, would you like me to mail you a copy of the mortgage documents? They have your signature on them." "Yes," I whispered. "Please send them right away." I hung up the phone and sat staring at the mess on my kitchen floor, my mind spinning with confusion and growing dread. How could I have a mortgage on a house I'd owned outright for 15 years? What documents could possibly have my signature on them? Then, like a cold knife sliding between my ribs, I remembered the papers I'd signed at Sarah Mitchell's office. "Just some paperwork," David had said. "Standard authorization forms." I found Sarah Mitchell's business card in my purse with trembling fingers and dialed her number. The receptionist put me through immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, how wonderful to hear from you. How are you enjoying your new financial arrangement?" "Ms. Mitchell, I just got a call from First National Bank saying I have a mortgage on my house. That can't be right." There was a slight pause. "Mrs. Thompson, the mortgage is part of the asset optimization strategy we discussed. By leveraging the equity in your home, we were able to create additional income streams and tax advantages for you." "But I don't understand. I don't want a mortgage. I want to own my house." "You do own your house," she said smoothly. "The mortgage is simply a financial tool that allows us to maximize your portfolio's performance. All the payments are handled automatically through the management system. You don't need to worry about anything." "But the bank called about a missed payment." "I'll look into that immediately. It's probably just a processing delay. These things happen when new systems are being implemented. I'll have it resolved by the end of the day." After I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried calling David, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back as soon as possible. The mortgage documents arrived 2 days later in a thick envelope that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I carried it to my kitchen table with shaking hands and carefully opened it. There, on page after page of legal documents, was my signature. My own handwriting authorizing a $180,000 mortgage on my home. But as I read through the papers, trying to make sense of the legal language, I realized this wasn't just a mortgage. It was something much more complex and frightening. The third page made my blood run cold. According to the document, I hadn't just mortgaged my house. I had transferred ownership of it to something called Thompson Family Asset Management LLC. Below that, in smaller print, I read that this LLC was managed by David Thompson, with full authority to make all decisions regarding the property. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the papers. I flipped through more pages, each one revealing another piece of the nightmare. My savings account had been transferred to the LLC. My pension payments were being redirected to the LLC. Even my Social Security benefits were being managed by the LLC. According to these documents, I no longer owned anything. Every asset I had was now controlled by my grandson through this company I'd never heard of. I called David again. This time he answered on the first ring. "Hi, Grandma. I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling about the new arrangement?" "David," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, "I need you to come over right now. We need to talk. Is everything okay? You sound upset. Just come over, please." He arrived within 20 minutes, letting himself in with the key I'd given him years ago. He found me sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by the mortgage documents, my face streaked with tears. "Grandma, what's wrong?" He moved toward me with apparent concern, but I held up a hand to stop him. "David, I need you to explain these papers to me. I need you to explain why the bank thinks I have a mortgage and why these documents say you own my house." For just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, his mask slipped. I saw something flicker across his face that I'd never seen before, something cold and calculating. Then the concerned grandson expression was back in place. "Grandma, you're misunderstanding the paperwork. Remember what Sarah explained? This is all part of the management system. You still live here. You still get your income. Nothing has changed for you. But it says here that you own everything. My house, my savings, my pension. Those are just technical terms," he said, pulling out his phone. "Here, let me call Sarah and have her explain it properly." But as he dialed, I watched his face carefully, and for the first time in 28 years, I realized I was looking at a stranger. The phone call with Sarah Mitchell while David sat in my kitchen was like watching a masterfully choreographed performance. She explained with patient condescension that the transfer of management authority was simply a legal mechanism to ensure efficient administration of my assets. "Think of it like giving someone power of attorney," she said through the speakerphone, "except more comprehensive and efficient. David now has the legal authority to manage everything on your behalf, which eliminates all the bureaucratic delays and complications you would otherwise face." "But what if I want to make a decision about my own money?" I asked. "Well, of course you can make suggestions and requests," she replied smoothly. "David would never do anything without considering your wishes. But the beauty of this arrangement is that you don't have to burden yourself with the actual decision-making process anymore." After the call ended, David seemed eager to leave. "See, Grandma? Nothing to worry about. You're in good hands." But I wasn't satisfied. That night, I called my neighbor, Elena Rodriguez, the only person I trusted who had any experience with legal matters. Her late husband had been a paralegal for 30 years. "Elena, I need you to look at some papers for me. Something doesn't feel right." She came over the next morning, bringing her reading glasses and a pot of fresh coffee. I watched her face as she went through the documents, seeing her expression grow increasingly grave. "Margaret," she said finally, setting down the papers with a heavy sigh, "I don't know how to tell you this gently. According to these documents, you've transferred complete ownership of all your assets to David's company, your house, your savings, your pension rights, everything. But Sarah said I still own everything, that it's just being managed." "No, honey." Elena's voice was soft but firm. "This isn't management. This is a complete transfer of ownership. Legally speaking, you don't own anything anymore. You're essentially a tenant in your own home, dependent on David's generosity for your living expenses." The words hit me like physical blows. That can't be right. David would never. He loves me. He's been taking care of me for years. Elena reached across the table and took my hands. "Margaret, I've seen enough legal documents to know what I'm reading. I'm so sorry, but you've been defrauded. Your own grandson has stolen everything you own. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, walking through my house, David's house now, touching furniture that was no longer mine, looking at pictures of a life that had been legally erased. The wedding photo of Robert and me on the mantel, the china cabinet filled with dishes from our early married years, the garden Robert had planted and I had tended. None of it belonged to me anymore. I tried calling David repeatedly, but he wasn't answering. When I drove to his apartment, his car wasn't there. Jessica answered the door, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Thompson, David isn't here. He's been really busy with work lately. Jessica, I need to talk to him. It's important." She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. He said you might be confused about some business matters, and that I should call him if you came by. The pity in her voice was almost worse than the betrayal itself. She knew. Somehow, she knew what David had done, and she was part of covering it up. That evening, I sat in my living room, no, David's living room, and tried to make sense of how this had happened. I thought about every conversation, every reassurance, every moment when I could have asked more questions or demanded more explanation. But the truth was, I had trusted him completely because he had earned that trust through years of genuine love and care. The cruelest part wasn't just the financial devastation. It was the realization that everything I'd believed about my grandson might have been a lie. Had he been planning this for months? Years? Had every kindness, every act of care, every "I love you, Grandma," been calculated manipulation? I called my daughter Patricia, David's mother, with trembling fingers. "Mom, you sound terrible. What's wrong?" "Patricia, I need to tell you something about David, and I need you to listen to me very carefully." I explained everything. The meeting with the lawyer, the mortgage, the documents, Elena's analysis. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom, that's impossible. David would never do something like that. Are you sure you're not confused? Maybe you should see Dr. Martinez and have him check." "I am not confused," I shouted, surprising myself with the force of my anger. "My own grandson has stolen everything I own, and you're asking if I need a mental health evaluation?" "Mom, please calm down. David loves you. He's always taken such good care of you. There has to be some explanation. The explanation is that your son is a thief and a liar." I hung up the phone, realizing that I was truly alone. My daughter didn't believe me. David was avoiding me. And I was sitting in a house that legally belonged to someone else, dependent on the goodwill of the person who had betrayed me. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me wonder if David would show up to evict me. Every creak of the house reminded me that I was now a guest in my own home. By morning, I had made a decision. I was going to fight back. I didn't have to wait long for the confrontation. David showed up at my door the next afternoon, using his key to let himself in just as he had hundreds of times before. But this time, everything was different. "Grandma, we need to talk," he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before, a hardness that sent chills down my spine. I was sitting in the living room, still in my bathrobe at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I hadn't been sleeping, hadn't been eating, and I probably looked as devastated as I felt. But when I saw him standing in my doorway, something fierce and protective awakened inside me. "Yes, we do need to talk," I said, standing up with more strength than I'd felt in days. "We need to talk about how you stole my house, my savings, and my entire life." His face didn't change, but I saw his shoulders straighten slightly. The pretense was dropping. "Grandma, you're being dramatic. Nothing has been stolen. Everything is exactly as we discussed." "We never discussed you owning my house. The house is still yours to live in," he said, his voice taking on that patient, condescending tone I'd heard from the lawyer. "Nothing has changed from your perspective." "Nothing has changed?" I felt my voice rising, years of suppressed anger finally finding an outlet. "David, I don't own anything anymore. I don't own the chair I'm sitting in. I don't own the bed I sleep in. I don't even own the coffee cup I drank from this morning." He sighed, like I was being unreasonably difficult. "Grandma, you're 73 years old. You don't need to own things anymore. You need to be taken care of. That's what I'm doing, taking care of you. By stealing everything I worked 40 years to build? I didn't steal anything." For the first time, his calm facade cracked, and I saw anger flash in his eyes. "Do you have any idea how much money you were wasting? How much you would have lost to taxes and bad investments and nursing home costs? I saved your assets from being completely depleted. Those were my assets to deplete, were they? He was fully dropped the mask now, and I was seeing a side of David I'd never imagined existed. Who earned that money, Grandma? You worked as a school secretary. Grandpa worked at the hardware store. You were never going to be rich. But I've been building something bigger, something that could benefit our whole family. What are you talking about? He began pacing around my living room, his living room, like a lawyer making a closing argument. I've been investing your money. Really investing it. Not just letting it sit in some pathetic savings account earning nothing. I've turned your $80,000 in savings into $120,000 in just 3 weeks. You gambled with my money? I invested it strategically. And the house, do you know what this property is worth now? I can leverage the equity to make real money, money that will benefit both of us. I stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the stranger who had been wearing my grandson's face. David, I don't care about making more money. I cared about security. I cared about knowing that I owned my own home, that I had my own savings, that I was independent. Independence? He laughed, and it was a cold sound that made my skin crawl. Grandma, you called me every time your internet went down. You couldn't figure out your own bank statements. You needed help grocery shopping. What independence? Each word was like a slap. I asked for help with technology and heavy lifting. I didn't ask you to steal my entire life. I didn't steal anything, he repeated, but now his voice was flat, mechanical. I saved you from yourself. You were going to die broke and alone in some state-run nursing home. Now, at least your assets are being managed properly. By someone who lies to his own grandmother? I never lied to you. I told you I wanted to help with your retirement planning. I told you we were going to optimize your assets. I told you that you wouldn't have to worry about financial decisions anymore. Everything I said was true. The casual cruelty of his logic took my breath away. In his mind, he had done nothing wrong because he had technically kept his promises, just not in the way any reasonable person would have understood them. David, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I trusted you. I loved you. I believed you were taking care of me. For just a moment, something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across his face. I am taking care of you, Grandma. You just don't understand the bigger picture. The bigger picture? What bigger picture? He ran his hands through his hair, suddenly looking younger and more like the grandson I remembered. I'm in some trouble, okay? I made some investments that didn't work out. I owe some people money. Serious people, who don't take no for an answer. I needed liquid assets fast, and your house and savings were just sitting there, doing nothing. So you decided to steal from your grandmother to pay off your gambling debts? It's not stealing if I'm going to pay it back. Once I get caught up, once I can breathe again, I'll figure out how to transfer everything back to you. You'll figure out how? I was screaming now, 40 years of pent-up politeness finally exploding. David, you don't get to figure out giving me back my own property. You don't get to steal my life savings to pay off loan sharks and then promise to maybe give it back someday. Keep your voice down, he said sharply, glancing toward the windows. The neighbors don't need to hear this. The neighbors? You're worried about the neighbors hearing that you're a thief? I'm not a thief. I'm your grandson, and I'm trying to solve a problem that affects both of us. If something happens to me, what do you think happens to you? The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I was completely dependent on him now, and he knew it. If he disappeared, if he was arrested, if his creditors came after him, I would be left with nothing and no way to prove that any of it had ever been mine. David, I said, sinking back into my chair, how did we get here? How did the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard grow up to be someone who could do this to me? He looked at me for a long moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of the grandson I'd loved. Then it was gone. I grew up, Grandma. I learned that the world doesn't care about your feelings or your sense of fairness. It cares about who's smart enough to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves. And I was an opportunity? You were family who needed help, and I was in a position to provide it in a way that benefited both of us. I looked at this young man who shared my blood, who had my late husband's eyes and my daughter's smile, and realized that somewhere along the way, I had lost him completely. The David I had loved. Maybe that person had never really existed at all. Get out, I said quietly. Grandma, get out of my house, your house, whatever it is now. Just get out. He stood there for a moment, and I thought he might apologize, might show some hint of remorse or recognition of what he had done. Instead, he pulled out his phone. I'll have Jessica bring you some groceries tomorrow. And Grandma, don't do anything stupid. You need me now more than ever." After he left, I sat in the silence of the house that was no longer mine, surrounded by memories that belonged to a life that had been legally erased. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't crying. I was planning. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. I was 73 years old. I had been betrayed by someone I loved more than life itself, and I had lost everything I had worked for. But I wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't going to go quietly into the night. My first call was to Elena Rodriguez. "Elena, I need your help, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who understands legal documents. I want to fight this." She was at my door within 10 minutes, carrying a yellow legal pad and wearing the determined expression I remembered from her days helping her husband with paralegal work. "Margaret, I've been thinking about this all night. What David did to you, it might be technically legal, but it's morally reprehensible, and there might be grounds to challenge it." We spent the morning going through every document again, this time with Elena taking detailed notes. She pointed out inconsistencies, questioned terminology, and identified several red flags that suggested the transaction might not have been as legitimate as Sarah Mitchell had claimed. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a clause buried deep in the third document. "This says you were represented by independent counsel during the transaction. Were you?" No, Sarah Mitchell was David's lawyer. She made that clear from the beginning. That's a problem. In transactions like this, especially involving elderly clients transferring substantial assets, there are supposed to be safeguards in place. You should have had your own attorney reviewing everything. David said the documents had been reviewed by experts at his insurance company. Elena snorted. "His insurance company works for him, not for you. Margaret, I think we need to talk to a real lawyer. Someone who works for you, not for David. I don't know any lawyers. And even if I did, how would I pay for one? I don't have any money anymore. Let me make some calls. My husband used to work with several attorneys who specialize in elder law. Some of them take cases on contingency, which means they don't get paid unless they win." While Elena was making phone calls, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. I needed to think, and I needed to feel like I still had some control over something, even if it was just the direction of my own footsteps. As I walked past the houses where I'd lived as a neighbor for over 20 years, I realized how much of my identity had been tied to ownership. I wasn't just Margaret Thompson. I was Margaret Thompson, who lived in the blue house with the rose garden, who had paid off her mortgage early, who had saved enough money to be independent in her old age. Without those things, who was I? I was someone who was going to fight back. That's who. When I returned home, Elena was waiting with good news. I spoke to an attorney named Michael Rodriguez, no relation, just coincidence, who specializes in elder financial abuse. He wants to meet with us this afternoon. Michael Rodriguez's office was nothing like Sarah Mitchell's impressive setup. It was in a strip mall, with mismatched furniture and legal books that looked like they'd been purchased at garage sales. But when he shook my hand and looked me in the eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen from Sarah Mitchell. Genuine concern. "Mrs. Thompson, Elena has explained your situation to me, and I want you to know that what happened to you is more common than you might think. Elder financial abuse is one of the fastest growing crimes in America, and it's particularly heartbreaking when it's committed by family members. Is there anything we can do? Maybe. The good news is that there are several potential legal issues with the way this transaction was handled. The bad news is that pursuing them will be complicated, expensive, and time-consuming, and David currently has all the resources while you have none." He spread the documents across his desk, pulling out a magnifying glass to examine some of the fine print. "Elena mentioned that you weren't represented by independent counsel. That's a significant problem. In addition, some of these clauses are so one-sided that they might be considered unconscionable, meaning they're so unfair that no reasonable person would agree to them if they fully understood what they were signing. But I did sign them." "Yes, but the question is whether you gave informed consent. Did you understand that you were giving up ownership of your house? Did you understand that you were giving David complete control over your pension and Social Security? Did you understand that you would have no legal recourse if he decided to sell everything and disappear?" "No," I said quietly. "I thought I was signing papers to make my retirement easier to manage. That's what we call fraud by misrepresentation. David and his attorney told you one thing, but the documents did something completely different. For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. So we can get my property back? We can try, but I need to be honest with you about what you're facing. David has hired a sophisticated attorney who knows how to make these transfers look legitimate. He has possession of all your assets, which means he has the resources to hire the best legal help. And proving fraud can be difficult, especially when the perpetrator is a family member who can claim he was acting in your best interests. So what do? We start by filing a complaint with the police. What David did might be criminal fraud, not just a civil matter. Then we file a civil lawsuit to challenge the validity of the asset transfers, and we try to get a court order freezing your assets so David can't dissipate them while the case is pending. How long will all this take? Months, maybe years, and there's no guarantee we'll win. I looked at Elena, who reached over and squeezed my hand. Margaret, you don't have to decide right now, but if you want to fight this, Michael is willing to take the case on contingency. What does that mean? It means I only get paid if we recover money for you, Michael explained. My fee would come out of whatever we're able to get back. If we lose, you don't owe me anything. I thought about David's words the day before. You need me now more than ever. He was counting on my dependence, my age, my isolation to keep me from fighting back. He thought I would just accept what he had done and be grateful for whatever scraps he chose to give me. He was wrong. Mr. Rodriguez, I said, I want to hire you. I want to fight this with everything I have. Are you sure? This is going to be difficult, and it's going to get ugly. David isn't going to just hand your assets back because we ask nicely. I'm sure. 3 weeks ago, I was an independent woman who owned her own home and had her own savings. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life as a dependent in my own house, living on the charity of someone who stole everything from me. Michael nodded. All right then, let's go to war. The police station was not a place I had ever imagined myself visiting as anything other than a tourist. Detective James Walker was younger than I'd expected, maybe in his early 40s, with graying temples and the kind of patient demeanor that suggested he'd heard every story imaginable. Mrs. Thompson, I understand you want to file a complaint about financial fraud, he said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from his cluttered desk. My grandson stole my house, my savings, and my pension, I said simply. I have the documents to prove it. Detective Walker opened a folder and began taking notes as I told my story. Unlike Sarah Mitchell's dismissive explanations or David's manipulative reassurances, he asked specific, detailed questions that made me feel like someone was finally taking this seriously. You said David claimed the documents had been reviewed by experts at his insurance company. Do you remember the name of the company? Pinnacle Insurance Services. He's worked there for about 3 years. Detective Walker made a note. And the attorney who handled the transaction, Sarah Mitchell, did she ever explain that you would be giving up ownership of your assets? No. She said it was a management system, that I would still own everything, but it would be handled more efficiently. Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to be honest with you. Cases like this are challenging to prosecute because the perpetrator usually has documentation showing that the victim signed the papers voluntarily. But there are several red flags in your situation that suggest this might be criminal fraud rather than just a civil dispute. What kind of red flags? First, the fact that you weren't represented by independent counsel. In legitimate asset protection planning, the attorney would have insisted you consult with your own lawyer. Second, the complexity and one-sided nature of the documents suggest they were designed to confuse rather than inform. And third, David's admission to you that he needed the money to pay off debts suggests this was never about protecting your assets. It was about accessing them. Detective Walker leaned back in his chair. I'm going to open an investigation. That means I'll be interviewing David, Sarah Mitchell, and anyone else involved in this transaction. I'll also be looking into David's financial situation to see if there's evidence of gambling debts or other financial pressures that might have motivated this. What should I expect? David and his attorney are going to claim that everything was done legally and that you consented to all the transfers. They'll probably suggest that you're confused or that you're being manipulated by people who don't understand the sophisticated financial planning they implemented for you. Will people believe that? Some might. That's why it's important that we document everything carefully and build a strong case showing exactly how you were deceived. Over the next 2 weeks, Detective Walker conducted his investigation with thoroughness that impressed me. He interviewed Elena Rodriguez, who confirmed that I had never mentioned anything about giving up ownership of my assets. He spoke with my doctor, who verified that I was mentally competent and had no cognitive issues that would impair my judgment. He even talked to my pastor, who confirmed that I had never mentioned David's supposed financial planning services. The most damaging evidence came from David's own workplace. Detective Walker discovered that David had been under investigation by Pinnacle Insurance Services for unauthorized transactions in client accounts. He had been suspended 2 weeks before our meeting with Sarah Mitchell, though he hadn't told me about losing his job. Mrs. Thompson, Detective Walker called to tell me, David wasn't just in debt from gambling. He had been stealing from his employer's clients to cover his losses. The company was preparing to file criminal charges against him when he quit and liquidated your assets. So he knew he was about to be arrested? It looks that way. Transferring your assets to his control gave him access to enough money to pay off his immediate debts and buy himself time to disappear if necessary. The investigation also revealed that Sarah Mitchell had been disciplined by the State Bar Association twice in the past 5 years for failing to properly represent client interests in asset transfer cases. She specialized in what Detective Walker called gray area transactions, technically legal but ethically questionable deals that skirted the edges of fraud. We have enough evidence to arrest David on charges of elder financial abuse and fraud, Detective Walker told me during a meeting at his office. The case against Sarah Mitchell is more complicated, but we're exploring charges related to her failure to ensure you were properly represented. What happens next? We arrest David and charge him. His attorney will probably try to get him released on bail, which means he might try to liquidate more of your assets before we can get a court order freezing them. That's why it's important that your civil attorney moves quickly to get a temporary restraining order. Michael Rodriguez had been working parallel to the police investigation, preparing our civil case. The day after Detective Walker's call, we appeared before Judge Patricia Hendricks to request an emergency freeze on all assets that had been transferred from my name to David's LLC. Your Honor, Michael argued, Mrs. Thompson was the victim of an elaborate fraud designed to steal her life savings and home. While the criminal case proceeds, it's essential that we prevent further dissipation of her assets. Sarah Mitchell appeared on David's behalf, looking considerably less confident than she had in her office. Your Honor, this is simply a family dispute over legitimate estate planning. Mrs. Thompson voluntarily transferred her assets for perfectly legal tax and management purposes. Judge Hendricks reviewed our documentation for 20 minutes before ruling. Based on the evidence presented, there are sufficient questions about the validity of these transfers to warrant protection of the assets in question. I'm issuing a temporary restraining order, freezing all assets currently held by Thompson Family Asset Management LLC pending resolution of both the criminal and civil cases. As we left the courthouse, Michael put his hand on my shoulder. Margaret, you should know that David is probably going to be arrested within the next few days. Are you prepared for how your family might react to that? I thought about Patricia, who still believed her son was incapable of the crimes he'd committed. I thought about my other grandchildren, who would have to reconcile the David they knew with the David who had stolen from their grandmother. Mr. Rodriguez, I said, 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew my grandson. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was secure in my own home. 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood my own life. I've already lost everything I thought I knew. Finding out who my family really is can't be any more devastating than what I've already survived. But I was wrong about that. David was arrested on a Thursday morning at 6 a.m. I know because Detective Walker called to tell me, and because Patricia called 20 minutes later, screaming through tears that I had destroyed her son's life. How could you do this to him, Mom? He's your grandson. He was trying to help you. Patricia, he stole everything I own. He was managing your money. There's a difference. The difference is that managing means I still own it, and stealing means he does. You're a bitter old woman who can't stand that someone else might know more about finances than you do. I hung up on my own daughter for the second time in my life. The next call was from my youngest grandson, Patricia's other son, Marcus. Grandma Margaret, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what David was doing, but I want you to know that not everyone in the family thinks you're wrong to press charges. That phone call meant more to me than any legal victory could have. David's arrest made the local newspaper. Local insurance agent charged with elder financial abuse. The article was small, buried on page 6, but it felt like a vindication that someone besides me and Detective Walker understood that what had happened was a crime, not a family misunderstanding. The criminal case moved faster than I had expected. Faced with overwhelming evidence of fraud and the prospect of additional charges related to his theft from Pinnacle Insurance Services, David's attorney advised him to accept a plea bargain. He pled guilty to elder financial abuse and fraud in exchange for a sentence of 3 years in prison and full restitution of my assets. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Walker called to tell me, "David has agreed to sign all your property back to you and to repay every penny that was taken from your accounts. His attorney says he's genuinely remorseful and wants to make things right. Is he really remorseful, or does he just want a lighter sentence? I don't know. But either way, you're getting your life back." The day I walked into the county clerk's office to sign the papers transferring my house back to my own name was one of the most emotional of my life. Michael Rodriguez was with me, along with Elena Rodriguez, who had refused to let me face any of this alone. "How does it feel to own your house again?" Elena asked as we walked out of the building. "Like waking up from a nightmare," I said, "but also like I'm not the same person who lost it." And I wasn't. The woman who had trusted blindly, who had signed papers without reading them, who had believed that family members were incapable of betrayal, that woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, more cautious, but also stronger and more self-reliant than I had ever been. The civil case took longer to resolve, but eventually, Sarah Mitchell's malpractice insurance paid a settlement that covered my legal fees and compensated me for the emotional distress of the ordeal. The State Bar Association suspended her license for 2 years and required her to take ethics courses before she could practice again. More importantly, they implemented new guidelines requiring independent representation for elderly clients in asset transfer cases, a change that might prevent other grandmothers from going through what I had experienced. 6 months after David's arrest, I received a letter from him in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dear Grandma Margaret," it began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand why. I know that saying I'm sorry isn't enough to fix what I did to you, but I need you to know that I am genuinely sorry. I was desperate and scared and stupid, and I convinced myself that I was helping you when I was really just helping myself. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope someday you can believe that the grandson who loved you was real, even if the grandson who betrayed you was real too." I read the letter 3 times, then put it in my desk drawer. I wasn't ready to forgive him, and I might never be, but I was ready to acknowledge that people are complicated, that love and betrayal can exist in the same heart, and that the David who had planted my tomatoes was the same person as the David who had stolen my house. A year after the arrest, I was contacted by a local television station that wanted to do a story about elder financial abuse. They interviewed me in my living room now, legally and permanently, and I told my story to warn other seniors about the dangers of trusting too completely, even when that trust seems to be placed in loving hands. "What would you say to other grandparents who might be facing similar situations?" the reporter asked. "I would say that love doesn't require you to sign papers you don't understand. I would say that anyone who truly has your best interests at heart will want you to get independent advice before making major financial decisions. And I would say that it's better to be a little suspicious and a lot secure than to be trusting and destitute." Today, as I write this story, I am 75 years old. I own my own home. I manage my own finances with the help of a fee-only financial advisor who was recommended by my bank, and I have rebuilt my savings to a level that gives me security and independence. David was released from prison 8 months ago. He has not contacted me, and I have not contacted him. Patricia and I exchange Christmas cards and brief phone calls on birthdays, but our relationship has never recovered from her refusal to believe that her son was capable of stealing from his grandmother. Marcus visits every few months, usually bringing his wife and 2 young children. I spoil those great-grandchildren shamelessly, but I have also set up educational trusts for them that they cannot access until they turn 25, and that no one else can touch for any reason. Elena Rodriguez remains my closest friend and confidant. We have coffee together every Wednesday morning, and she often jokes that she should have charged me for her legal consulting services during the crisis. "You saved my life," I tell her. "You saved your own life," she always replies. "I just helped you figure out how to fight back." The truth is, We both played essential roles. Elena gave me the knowledge and support I needed to understand what had happened to me. But I made the choice to fight, to refuse to accept that my life was over, to insist that even at 73, I had the right to determine my own future. I learned that betrayal, even by someone you love deeply, doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter, one where you are stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect what matters to you. I learned that trust is a gift that should be earned, not assumed, and that asking questions is not a sign of distrust, but a sign of wisdom. Most importantly, I learned that no matter how old you are, no matter how vulnerable you feel, no matter how much you've lost, you still have choices. You can choose to fight back. You can choose to demand justice. You can choose to rebuild. My grandson thought he could steal my independence along with my assets. He was wrong about that. In the end, I am more independent now than I was before he betrayed me, because I know with absolute certainty that I can take care of myself, fight for myself, and survive even the worst betrayals. That knowledge is worth more than any amount of money, and it's the one thing no one can ever steal from me.